This week in racing, we talk about a story involving F1 and smoking that doesn't involve the back end of Daniel Ricciardo's Red Bull. We also talk about the internet's favorite racing driver getting a full-time IndyCar ride for next year. And speaking of IndyCar, and F1 for that matter, there's an invasion happening. F1 drivers are invading IndyCar coming into 2019. But the first story and the thing you probably clicked on this video for is the fact that Marlboro is back. Kinda. They never actually left. This is a very confusing thing, so we're going to get into some semantics here. The official sponsor of Scuderia Ferrari, and in fact, the only official sponsor of Scuderia Ferrari, is Philip Morris Incorporated, which of course owns the Marlboro brand of tobacco products. Now, of course, Marlboro has not been allowed to advertise virtually in every country for the last 12 years. In fact, the last time a Marlboro-sponsored car raced was at the 2007 Chinese Grand Prix. That was the last time we saw the logo officially. Now, there have been several ways that Philip Morris Inc. has tried to get the Marlboro name to be continued to be associated with Ferrari. In fact, they control so much of the team from their sponsorship that they even control the color of the car. There's a reason that on the color gradient, the Ferrari leans more towards orange than it does towards the blood Ferrari red. And what's also interesting about that is that Philip Morris is the broker of each of the logos that you see on the car. Ferrari gets very little in ways of money from the companies like Shell or UPS on the side of their car. That's all brokered through Philip Morris. It's a very strange legal way that they've gone about doing things, and especially, like I said, getting their brand name out there. For a very long time, they entered the team, the official team name that they would put on the entry list was Scuderia Ferrari Marlboro. So anytime the team was successful, or anytime the team name was officially published, Marlboro was mentioned in those reports. Even if the TV commentators wouldn't say it, on the official timing and whatnot, it would say that. That was nixed a few years ago. I think they finally got wise to that, and they being the FIA. But they haven't gotten wise yet, and I'm surprised they haven't, to Ferrari's team logo. Just take a look at that and tell me there's not a resemblance to Marlboro on there. And there hasn't even been a reluctance to try to skirt some of the laws and regulations regarding sponsorship on the actual vehicles themselves. 2010, there was a big controversy involving a barcode that appeared on Fernando Alonso's and Felipe Massa's cars. That was banned by the FIA. And so now we head to 2018 and the most recent attempt by Philip Morris to try to evoke some, I guess you could say, subliminal, or maybe not so subliminal in this internet age where we have this information so readily available to us, to evoke their tobacco brand. This most recent attempt is called Mission Win Now. Now, if you look up Mission Win Now, it's a very vague program. There's a lot of positive messages out there, and it almost comes off, or it does come off because it probably is very much lawyer-driven, attorney-driven. I mean, the tobacco companies have to fight governments, so they hire the best lawyers in the entire world. So they've crafted this whole thing talking positivity, emphasis on words like change, and talking about never promoting a product, which I find a bit laughable, no doubt about it. And some of the positivity things are kind of very strange, like promoting a book that Kimi Räikkönen wrote that are all haikus. It's so strange. But we get to kind of the real egregious part of this, in my mind, which is the logo itself. On the car, you'll see several Mission Win Now logos. Particularly, the largest one is on the engine cover. You notice the M slanted, and the two M's, there's actually a mirror. It's an M and a W, but it certainly looks like two M's to me. Those being slanted the way they are also provoke the shape of a chevron in red and white. I wonder what's red and white with a chevron. then the entire logo itself kind of shows off this design objective, I guess you could say. As you can see, the whole thing is slanted in the shape. Philip Morris calls it a chevron, or an arrow, but it's very clearly supposed to be a chevron. And then what's interesting to me, or at least what I observed from actually watching practice earlier yesterday, was that on the rear wing especially, the mission logo, the mission part of the logo, which sticks up onto the top end plate of the top element of the rear wing, looks remarkably similar to the way Marlboro looked on the 2007 Ferrari, and it's so bang on. And here's the scary part about all this. Their marketing worked, because I'm making this video here. It's going to be at least watched by about 10,000 people, probably more, because it's an F1 topic and it discusses smoking, which is a hot button issue. We're talking about Marlboro on a race car in the year 2018. And we're not talking about in the context of like, wow, Emerson Fittipaldi won the 1993 Indy 500. Or wow, Ayrton Senna, world champion, Alan Prost. We're not talking about historical drivers associated with Marlboro. We're talking about Kimi Räikkönen, Sebastian Vettel, and the modern Scuderia Ferrari. So they've worked. They've worked us all. They got us. Now, how long will this stay before it's regulated out, or there is some sort of a change here, or the FIA kind of cracks down and says, you can't do that? It's going to be very interesting, because there has been a bit of a lull period where Philip Morris and Ferrari haven't really tried to advertise, or maybe not advertise. They haven't tried to advertise anything in particular from Philip Morris themselves on the car. That's what I guess the way to say it is. And now they've done it. It's actually, again, I think the last time they tried it was the barcode, which was blatantly obvious what it was supposed to be. And this appears to be a little bit more measured and a hell of a lot more clever. Whether you agree with it or not, it's a very clever marketing strategy. And it's so interesting as well, because we're all talking about smoking, even specifically on their website, or at least what some people have been able to gather about this program, some of it is, again, it's also vaguely worded. I don't really think it's much of an actual thing that they're going to be trying as an initiative, but it seems like they're trying to move their company more in the direction of electronic cigarettes or vaping and all that stuff. Now, whether that or not that actually comes to pass remains to be seen. But this vague talking vision of the future thing, it seems to me, and I'm not a lawyer, but I look at it and I think this will probably stay around for a while. I think the place where the FIA or maybe some government entities could get them would be in the design of the logo itself. They do have an explanation. Again, they say there's an arrow in there somewhere, but the only arrow I see is the Marlboro chevron. And I guess we get to the meat of this, and probably the thing why everything is so controversial is the moral issue of cigarette sponsorship. One of the reasons, or at least one of the major reasons I've heard that smoking, or not smoking, but cigarette advertising is banned in auto racing is the fact that it is essentially an excuse for the companies to advertise to children. And I see the valid criticism there. I would say it's almost more of a health thing, at least from what I would look at. I think the health thing, the thing that smoking is obviously bad for you. It obviously shortens your life. It obviously impacts your ability to perform just daily tasks because of the reduced lung capacity. All these things are well known, but at the same time, I see that as being a reason that you would say, okay, maybe we shouldn't allow these companies to advertise. That being said, and this is going to be a controversial opinion, I know what it's going to be. Cigarettes are still a legal product. Tobacco is still a legal product. I think it's a bit strange to me that they can't advertise at all their product. And I get it. and I understand all the criticisms, and I certainly think that why do these loopholes still exist? If it's this egregious, if it's this morally reprehensible to advertise Marlboro cigarettes on a race car, why on earth is Philip Morris allowed to put any sort of a logo on anything? Why are they allowed to give Scuderia Ferrari money, billions of dollars, more than likely, in sponsorship money over the past 50 years that they've been sponsoring the team? Why is this allowed if the tobacco companies are not allowed to advertise? And what's interesting about all of this is that I'm not convinced 100% that cigarette sponsorships necessarily are like convince people to start smoking. I personally, this is a personal experience, of course yours may differ, but I grew up in the era, particularly in kart, one of my favorite series growing up, where virtually every car had some shred of tobacco advertising on it. And compound that, both of my parents smoked when I was a kid. So, and I've never had the desire to go out and say, well, I'm going to go, puff on some Cools, or I'm going to go puff on some Marlboros. I've never had that desire because I knew what the issue was. I knew what was wrong with it. I knew what it would do to me as a human being. I knew it would shorten my life. I knew it would shorten my athletic ability. It would shorten all these things that would, worsen my life. It would zap my pocketbook, for God's sakes. And I knew all these things. But at the same time, boy, I was happy to see him spending all that money in racing. It's a double-edged sword, no doubt about it. That being said, I think it's awfully cheeky of Philip Morris to be doing this. I certainly would be interested. I'm sure you already have posted in the comments what you think, but I'd certainly be interested to see how this debate is going, or where you stand on tobacco advertising, and what you think about this specifically. And particularly from Philip Morris. I don't really know of any other tobacco companies that really push advertising like this. I mean, I know that Marlboro has such a stranglehold on a lot of people's nostalgia for the sport. Certainly mine. I think of Marlboro cars when I think of like the Penske dominance at the Indianapolis 500. I saw Marlboro cars win at Indianapolis. So, they know that they've got a very strong brand identity in motorsports. And so I see why they're there. I just do see also that, like, wow, and what will the FIA do? That's the other question I have. Will they step in here, or how long will this go on? The logos have remained on the car, at least for now, so we'll see how long it goes. Speaking of controversy, internet darling Santino Ferrucci will be confirmed for the second Dale Coyne Racing car in IndyCar in 2019, as reported by Racer.com. Now, we talked about Santino Ferrucci quite a few weeks ago, probably a month or so ago. I probably don't need to go over again the amount of controversy surrounding this driver. He certainly has not made a lot of friends on just across the board in terms of his racing career and a lot of what he's done in his personal life. Now, it's interesting that Dale Coyne has gone with Santino Ferrucci when he apparently had a lot of options for drivers to team with Sebastian Bourdais. Now, certainly a guy like Ed Jones maybe didn't leave on the right foot at Dale Coyne Racing, wasn't really an option, but you also had guys there who have raced for the team this year, like Zachary Clayman de Mello, who looked very serviceable, in fact, more than serviceable, particularly at the Indianapolis 500 this year. You also look at guys like Pietro Fittipaldi, who really didn't get a great opportunity this year after breaking both his legs at Spa. And you also look at guys who are looking on the outside as potential drivers coming into the team, like Staffel Van Doorn. We're going to be talking about him a little bit later. So why was the choice made this early to go with Ferrucci? There's one of two things happening here. Either Dale sees something in Ferrucci that he thinks he can develop and turn into a driver who can match Bourdais and learn a lot from Bourdais, and then be a driver that can replace Bourdais in terms of performance in the future. We'll see how that all goes. But the real, I think, key to all this is the fact that Ferrucci has a budget. And that's still something we're talking about in IndyCar 2018. And it's something that we're going to keep talking about probably until the end of time. And this is actually something that's come up recently in IndyCar, specifically about driver insurance policies and all that stuff. And just real quick, without getting on too much of a soapbox there, unfortunately, unfortunately, let's say unfortunately for that. Unfortunately, there will always be people willing to pay to drive race cars. Hell, I've done it myself, personally. So even at the top level of sport, you're never going to have a situation where you're going to have drivers who are across the board 100%, the entire grid, 28 drivers are going to be all paid. Even in the glory days of kart, the glory days of F1, the glory days of NASCAR, you look at any series, there's always been at least one driver on that grid that paid to be there. So, and it's never going to go away because the costs associated with this sport, even if you control every aspect of that car, control costs on every aspect, it's always going to be expensive. So drivers like Ferrucci are always going to be making inroads in IndyCar. Now, certainly, drivers without the political baggage of a Santino Ferrucci won't always be in IndyCar. And that's going to be the interesting thing. He's certainly been trying to rehabilitate his image. He's been going on a lot of podcasts, doing a lot of interviews and whatnot. I'm not convinced yet. We'll have to wait and see. Let me know what you think of Ferrucci down in the comments. And let's talk about, Ferrucci's an F1 test driver. Let's talk about some more drivers with some F1 experience. And yeah, the IndyCar silly season continues to be absolutely red hot. We're not even talking about Alonso anymore. We're talking about guys like Marcus Eriksen and the aforementioned Staffel Van Doorn as really potential drivers for next season's Verizon IndyCar, next season's IndyCar series, not Verizon IndyCar series. Yeah, the big news this weekend was that Marcus Eriksen is very serious about coming to IndyCar next year, and he's looking like he's going to be in the 23 car for Carlin Racing. Now, wait a second, you're saying the 23 car for Carlin Racing is the one that Charlie Kimball has. You're right. He may not have that seat next year, according to Racer.com and several other sites that have reported that news. It's actually gone out pretty publicly, which I was kind of surprised about, which makes me think that Eriksen is more than likely going to be in that seat next year, which probably means that either Kimball will find the funding to get that third Carlin car on the grid, which I think is unlikely. I think Ed Jones will get that seat. So where does Charlie Kimball go? Well, I think you take a 23 and you swap those numbers around, make that a 32, and I think he'll be driving for Juncos next year. Particularly, I think if he's out at Carlin, he'll be in that Juncos car at least for the Indy 500. That's my speculation on that one. We'll see how that goes. But yeah, that is the thing. Charlie Kimball was really an integral part of Carlin Racing developing their car this year. And I think if he doesn't return to the team, it's going to be a little bit of an unfortunate thing for them. Now, a lot of people will point out, yeah, Kimball was qualifying toward the back of the field a lot of the time, but he always raced really well. I can't even remember a major mistake from Charlie Kimball the entire year. I think he crashed at St. Pete, but outside of that, there wasn't a whole lot of mistakes from Kimball. He was a solid driver. He got some decent results, and it's a shame if Carlin won't be able to keep him on. Now, Marcus Eriksen, I think he's going to be, if he comes, I think he's going to be a really solid driver. He has been a solid driver at Sauber. He probably hasn't really had the equipment to show particularly anything. Now, he's certainly not a Charles Leclerc. Let's get that straight. There's clearly a talent difference between those two drivers, and I'm not trying to say that he would have any ability to challenge Leclerc. He clearly isn't in the same equipment now. But I think he'd be a serviceable mid-pack driver. You look at what a Max Chilton has done. Of course, they may end up being teammates next year. So you look at what a Max Chilton has done. He was a mid to back of the pack driver in F1. He's a mid to top 10 driver in IndyCar, just based on the fact that the equipment is so much closer. Now, Staffel Van Doorn, he hasn't really been linked with a specific team outside of Dale Coyne, but he was interviewed by Will Buxton on the pre-race for the Suzuka thing, the pre-show on the internet, on YouTube. And he jokingly suggested that he might do NASCAR next year, but he also didn't really say no to the possibility of going IndyCar racing next year. I think he's also doing Formula E, so he might be a busy boy next year. There's several drivers who are going to be busy boys next year in terms of their schedules. But yeah, it's interesting. I think I said this on one of the radio shows that I've called into, and I really feel like this is, especially if Alonso comes, it's giving me a lot of 1993 vibes. Hey, look, some 1993 cars. It's giving me the vibe of the Mansell era, because not only Mansell was coming over to IndyCar from F1, you also had guys like Stefan Johansson. You had Emerson Fittipaldi, who was well established at that point in IndyCar racing. You had Nelson Piquet coming over. You had all these guys from F1 kind of moving over, and you also had like the Christian Danners of the world giving it a shot, kind of putting their toe in the water. So it's giving me that feeling. I think there's going to be, if every piece falls into place for next year, I think we're going to see a real international interest in IndyCar racing that we haven't seen in a very long time. So it's an exciting time. I'd like to know what you think of the IndyCar silly season as a whole. At some point, I'm going to have to do a video where I make predictions based on what we know, what we don't know going into next year, because otherwise all the seats are going to be filled at some point. But thank you guys so much for watching This Week in Racing. Be sure to subscribe for more F1, IndyCar, NASCAR, motorsport content, and we'll see you in the next video.